Hello to everyone. Glad to continue some, group production. But first of all, then I would like to say that we met in a kind of, production of improvising music, and I'm glad that we could actually just making very specific spot on historical range of artistic organization. I am personally, as an artist, I starting to work and collaborating with the groups, since 80s. And through these processes, it's actually shaping my mind. And to being in a groups, it's much more exciting, or on a solo production. But nevertheless, it's not only my personal perception. Then later on, in 2000, under the social circumstances, we started to organize our own organization, Good.org, in Novi Sad. And from the very beginning of our work, we started to reflect structure of and why the people actually organizing themselves, and what's the purpose of, or what is the dynamics in the collective practices. Especially now, then in this occasion, then we're talking about improvising music, and then certainly we're talking about very strong individual energy, then collaborating together. It's again, very specific arrangement of collectivists. And since then, we actually start constantly work on this as a very selfishly auto-reflection of why we are doing and how we are doing this in our own production. But on the end, it's also starting to collect a kind of history of collective, practices and what's going on. Because what I'm telling you now, I'm not a historian, I'm not a theoretician, I'm not, just as an artist who is actually collecting all these aspects and trying to provide as a notion of some kind of typology, especially in a historical framework of Yugoslavia. And when I exchanged thoughts with Jonas, then he mentioned that it would be good to keep it in historical framing. And it actually looks from this present moment like a really deep history, and talking about very specific geopolitical context of how Yugoslavia rise and what's happened after the Second World War, and something that I would like just to share with you with several cases. All these cases actually we bring in our own search and research project together with numbers of collaborators, sociologists, art historians, art critics, and going through several model of investigation to interviewing them or making kind of analysis or texts, and we publish some of this material. So I can give it to you just circulating this material. I will just mention some of the names in our own archive, but mostly to presenting you in our own perspective, kind of very interesting for this afternoon 4 cases, let's say, which is present kind of specific arrangement how the collective come up together. So I will start with a very specific agenda. Then after the Second World War, we have a Yugoslavian position in between two blocks, coming up with the social revolution that was mostly covered by the interest of Soviet bloc. And in the late 40s, it's starting, the arrangement in Yugoslav socialism was stepping out of these relations with the Soviet, but still was actually kind of agenda of culture production focused on this notion of social realism. So one of the first steps in such a atmosphere was actually the group which is called Experimental Atelier. It means Exat 51. They're starting to work in 51 and creating kind of a statement or kind of a manifesto, fight with or against the social realism and trying to make some kind of alternative parts. But why I'm actually choosing this, because it's not such a big thing and it's not so new than a lot of people trying to against something. But in this particular case, I would like just to focus on the group. First of all, then it was a multimedia bunch of people, architects, designers, artists, sculptors, musicians. And they started as an experimental atelier in Zagreb, but following the facts, then especially after the Stalin disagreement of Tito, and then it's proclaimed kind of a new agenda in a culture policy. This group is actually creating kind of specific workshops, kind of special policies of how to exhibit some, or how to design some aspects, and it's becoming, in the period of 5 years, completely appropriate by the state. And they're starting to be kind of a strong entrepreneur and strong presenting policies of emancipatory, language of new modernistic culture language. And it was something that it was, I think that no one from the members of the group didn't actually expect something like this, but they actually starting in 51, and they finished in their own work. I mean, basically it's disintegrating the group in 56. And then we could actually follow the private, biographies of very important architects and artists, how they actually transformed their own languages in the future. But this particular period of 5 years was interesting for me, just to presenting then someone come up with a very strong statement, and obviously was adopted and appropriated by the state. So the decade later, we have another case. It's a Slovenian group, OHO. It's also a bunch of visual artists, poets, literature coming up to work on, and also trying to, but we have to name it, in the 60s already start to be develop the language of institutional critique. And then all these artists starting to find some particular language standing out of particular format of exhibiting in the galleries, in the museums, and very very kind of traditional format of representing the culture language. So these artists actually start to work, but then through this process of working in together, promoting happenings, performances, short experimental films, all kind of bunch of stuff, collaborating with the different artists through whole Yugoslavia, they find themselves in a position to be covered by the system, let's say. But then they stepping forward, instead of the very first case of Exit 51, a whole group slightly reformed themselves, and they basically starting to be commune. They get out from Ljubljana, starting to live in the nature. I mean, it's also reflecting on as a many universal and worldwide, cases. Then, alternative theaters, But in Yugoslav cases, that was actually one of the first. Then they come out, starting to build up the farm, self-organizing and existing, policies, trying to work with the villages around. So it's becoming more and more, extend and taking out from the, let's say, system as we could actually name it as an art system. And in terms of that, it's also later on we could actually name it and find it a lot of examples in Yugoslav contemporary art, how it's actually reflect and how it's influenced by OHO group. They are also being, we have following the facts, how they actually starting to practicing this. Of course, then just because of the position of Slovenia, it was strong influences of original avant-garde artists who was still alive in the 50s and 60s, and they becoming kind of a mentor or major supporter of what they are doing. So, but then they extend and trying to finding kind of different, modality to being out of kind of artistic expression as we know. They become also very present in Novi Sad, from where I'm coming from, and they starting to collaborate with the young poets and artists. So I'd also would like to mention here the case of art group code. Yeah, just one mentioned then group of Ho actually never really stopped their own work. So basically, they're literally from '66 when they founded. They in some particular time of production, it's literally transformed themselves in the next age. And then even now, the live members are practicing some mentioning in specific cases and producing their own production in a different ways out of the, let's say, traditional art system. But during the 70s, actually late 60s, they start to be very present in Novi Sad, and they of course influenced the young poets and artists in Novi Sad. So the group Code starting to be active in that time. They're presenting their own works totally out of, let's say, usual places as galleries and museums. Usually it was kind of student magazines, small leaflets. So that was the medium how they actually operate. Instead of the whole group, which is still active now, the Code group was active less than a year. But we could actually compare with the different situation of political and let's say circumstances. Just because of this, then the language of young artists in that time, it was mostly like in their own 20s. They proclaim kind of a strong statements and fight instead of a policy of socialism what's happened in that period in Novi Sad, in Serbia and in Yugoslavia. They produce open letters to the public, Yugoslav public. They mention a lot of very provocative, formats to against or actually to oppose the policy what produced in Yugoslavia in that time. And we have a very rare cases then when we compare what they produce and, for instance, what produced artists from Oho in Ljubljana or in Zagreb or in Skopje was not so radical in that way terms. But what was happened then, the local politicians in Novi Sad actually, they being very, strongly, react on it, and they took two artists into the prison. And this process was actually create completely different atmosphere, of course, and young people, an artist who was actually gathering in this circle was actually start to be very afraid. And it was create kind of a strong barrier of representing the public voice in that area. We could be, being from Novi Sad, I could actually go in much deeper analysis how it's actually reflect these cases later on in the cultural policy in Novi Sad and later on in general, agenda of contemporary art. But for this particular group was very strong cut, and even then in their own internal dynamics was actually such a cases was really breaking down. And then it's the fourth cases will be in the 80s already. Probably it's even closer to us, and it's still Yugoslavia. And in the 80s is actually becoming kind of a much broader platform of artists who's actually starting to organize themselves as a specific statement of critical thinking and oppose the policy in Yugoslavia. And they create with the national boundary and then the framework of national identity. So basically they organize themselves in different categories, like a section for theater, a section for art, section for music, and then you probably heard about Neue Slowenische Kunst and Leiberg group and Irvin art group, and so all of them actually create kind of a theoretical pool and manifesto in the beginning of 80s, and they create kind of very successful, performances, which is trace it, kind of a different level of representing art language in Yugoslavia in that time. But in a deep political crisis of Yugoslavia, since '87, we have kind of a very paradoxical situation. Then, as we have cases in Exit 51, then the state actually appropriate the practices of the very first one. We have another case then in Slovenian case, the state itself actually becoming, separate of Yugoslavia. So the prefix of Neue Slowenische Kunst, it's becoming kind of a new tricky position for themselves, how to deal with a level of nationalistic, framework, which is already exists as a new state and new visibility, including, national prefix. So all these artists, still now very active, try to step away through creating kind of a different artistic concept of virtual states, or coming out of position to control, or at least to be covered just for the traditional art market. But for me, especially today, I would actually choosing these 4 cases just and our intention from the very beginning with all these associates, what we actually bring in the process of our research, was mostly focused on how they are artists actually choosing to work together. Where is the reflection of being in a collective instead of individual, and especially in our research was actually much more focused on dynamics in the collective, not to follow as like traditionally what they did, where they're presenting, and how they're actually being success or not success. It's mostly focused on internal dynamics, how they're actually choosing the process then it's going on. Are they having kind of a leader in the group, or how they actually proceeding, the process, then the process it's coming till the end, or how they actually changing decision meanings during the process, and all other stuff. So that's the way then we're producing a numbers of interviews and trying to cover in a specific timeline since beginning of socialistic Yugoslavia till today. But I would say that 1991 was a turn point for us. I mean, for everyone who is living in ex-Yugoslav, space. First of all, then it's becoming kind of a new era. Then it's changing a lot, coming up with the technology, and it's changing the purpose of being in a group. It's not necessarily, also focusing on a very specific spot. So today we could actually sharing almost everywhere globally, worldwide, the problem of surviving. We mentioned today in the radio interviewing, how actually it's reflect public money distribution, what is the, all kind of aspects of supporting specific artistic production and etc. So those questions actually start to be kind of a traumatic elements, for everyone, globally. And plus in the 90s, when we had this kind of strong pushment by technology, it was create kind of a new era of interdisciplinary, and then a lot of people from different approaches and different skills starting to work together. It's really provide kind of a new perspectives than even we are, and as we have to reflect ourselves, it's not anymore, consist only on a place that we are officially from Novi Sad, but a lot of our associates are, like octopus, in the different spots globally. So even our friends here, then we could actually start to collaborate in the future, even more, or provide. So it's becoming kind of a different nature of collectivist practice instead of the period during the period of Yugoslavia. And I think then we could actually assume that this is something then we have to reflect for our own, how it's dealing with the sensibility, and trying to finding specific political figure than what we are doing. It's not national level anymore. Then it's more like a something which is more reflect on our own deeply political, sensible orientation and how to connect. And this is something that it's in a global aspects provide also different kind of provocations in a way, and trying to find kind of a different model of reconnecting. And I think it's kind of ideal position. Then everyone has to choose for their own, what will be the possible, strain forward, in a production or in a life. And I like to illustrate even for myself, then this one very popular, very important old African saying, which changing the context we could actually accept for ourselves. Then if you want to be fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, go in a group. So that's something then I would propose. Then being in a group, we could actually learn a lot from ourselves, and it's trace it kind of a platform for our own self-learning non-stop. That's something that it's never repeated, never happened in kind of a reproduction, and it's really create kind of a very stimulate, situation for future production. So that's what I would like to share with you as a particular 4 cases. But any other, reflections, I would like to to support or to comment together with you. Thank you very much. And one thing more than just when we are all together here, something which is related to our own production. Just talking about this traumatic, period of time of Yugoslavia. Recently, we produced a book in English, Past: An Introduction to the Problem. This is actually a specific conversation in between Boris Budin, philosopher, who is based now in Berlin, with the filmmaker from Novi Sad, Želimir Žilnik, and they're operating and elaborating some concepts of socialistic time in Yugoslavia, which could be very valuable now in neoliberal, aspects. So something which is failure in socialistic Yugoslavia, then we actually produce as a treasury for future. So everyone who is actually interested, we could share as well also this one. Oh yeah, and we have it as a PDF. Then you can freely download from our website. So during these days, I'm not alone here. Just to say, it's a lot of us here around a group. So it's also something that in next days we are more than open to share with you our own thoughts on something that has come up from our own production, and even more happy to collaborate in the future. So thanks, Jonas, Gaudens, and Charlotte for having us here. Yeah.